I don't believe I deserve this award. But since the day I got to West Point in 1972 and Major Jacobs was on the faculty, I got a lot of things I don't think I really deserved. But I would like to talk, he knows. But I would like to talk about the people who do deserve this recognition. In 2004, I had been in command of the counterterrorist forces in Iraq for about a year, and one of my non-commissioned officers was in a firefight, wounded, and subsequently lost one of his legs. Annie would go to Walter Reed regularly to visit our wounded, and she went in to visit him. And before you go into each room of a wounded individual, particularly if you've been through this, you know, you're not sure the frame of mind of the person in the room, so you go in with some trepidation. And so Annie went into Chuck's room, and she was a little bit nervous of just about how he was going to respond. And he had a little pull-up bar above his bed, and he's pulling himself up by his arms, and he's incredibly upbeat. And he tells Annie, he says, listen, tell the boss I'm not going to be on the next combat deployment, but I'm going to be on the one after that. And she goes, okay, Chuck. And in her mind, she's thinking that's more hopeful than I think is realistic. But Chuck also knew I'm a big Monty Python fan. So he says, and tell the boss it's only a flesh wound. Not long after that, we made the decision in the spring of 2005, when we were losing the war, that my force had to go out to the western Euphrates River Valley. And that river valley goes from Al-Qaim, where it enters Iraq and goes down to Fallujah, subsequently goes along the Euphrates River to Baghdad. And the attempt was to take back terrain that Al-Qaeda had in fact taken. And they actually called parts of the area the Islamic Republic of Al-Qaim. And as we went out with a small number of forces because we didn't have a lot of forces. And we sent a number of brave men. And very quickly we started paying a price that for a very small unit like Delta Force and the SEALs and Rangers was very painful. On May 31st, a sergeant first class who I'd grown up with in the Rangers named Steve Langmack was killed. 2 weeks later, in another operation, 2 more NCOs, Mike McNulty and Bob Horrigan, were killed. And as our casualties mounted, it became very, very difficult for us to maintain the focus that we had. But the people made the difference. If you remember, some years ago, I think 2003, Time magazine made the American soldier the person of the year. And they put a picture on there, and I think it was one of the worst things they could have ever done, although well-intentioned, because it gave the impression, and it was reinforced by books and movies and whatnot, that soldiers are 10 feet tall, particularly special operators are steely-eyed automatons, when in fact, they're 30-plus-year-old family people with kids in high school and mortgages and hopes and dreams. When Mike McNulty and Bob Horrigan were killed, amazingly, they were both twins, and both were survived by a twin. Bob Horrigan had grown up in A Company 3rd Ranger Battalion when I was a company commander, and he and his twin brother, the Horrigan privates, were just as you would imagine. They were happy-go-lucky characters that later grew up into these incredible non-commissioned officers. But they were human beings. They weren't anything more or anything less. And that's what makes it so amazing what they have done. That's why the people you represent and the families that you support so deserve it, because they are so very human. Not because they are bigger, taller, stronger, smarter, braver than any of the rest of us, but because they are very human, yet they choose and they commit themselves to do more. Sergeant Langmack was killed in 2005, survived by his wife, Rachel, and a son. On Christmas Eve 2009, when I was commanding forces in Afghanistan, I did what most commanders do around holidays. I flew to a number of remote bases to visit soldiers. And we arrived after dark in southern Afghanistan to a remote base that looked a little like a Beaugest fort. And it was on a wind-blown area. And it had a platoon plus of American soldiers and about an equal number of Afghan soldiers. And the sergeant major, Mike Hall, and I arrived. We landed outside the little camp, no room to get a helicopter inside. We walk inside. It's cold, and we go in one of the little rooms. They've brought in most of the people that aren't pulling security, give us a chance to wish them Merry Christmas, talk to them. And as you do, we took the opportunity to interact. Soldiers are usually a little bit standoffish when a senior officer and a non-commissioned officer come in, but after a little while, you say, hey, let's take some pictures. And they bring out things, and they want to take pictures with you. And I'm about to take a picture with a young man, and I looked at his name tag. And I froze. Because his last name was Langmack. And I looked at him, and I asked him if his father had been in the Army, and he said yes. And then I asked him if his father had been a Ranger, and he said yes. And he knew exactly where I was going, and he said, yes, my father was Steve Langmack, your comrade. And so, after all that his family had done and paid, now young Steve Langmack had decided to join. And now he was serving in a tough area, in a thankless job, with no fanfare. And he didn't come up to me and say, hey, I'm the son of a hero. He just came up as any other young soldier. And that's who you're representing. That's what your generosity and support makes such a difference for. So you have but more importantly, you have thousands of families and service members deeply in your debt. My thanks.